Ruth Ainsley found me near the dark end of the porch about an hour after the last of the ants had gone up to bed, and the first thing out of her mouth wasn't a question. Walk with
Walk
me.
with me.
We didn't talk on the way down to the water. She lowered herself onto the bench at the end of the dock, slower than she wanted anyone watching to notice, and patted the space beside her until I sat. I already understood this wasn't going to be a conversation about the weather. I want to tell you something before I go to bed, and 80 years old tomorrow doesn't leave a woman much patience for waiting until morning. I stayed because you don't say no to someone who has outlived a lifetime's worth of nonsense and buried more people than she's cried in front of. The lake was doing that thing lakes do at night, black and flat and pretending to be still, and for a second neither of us spoke, which with Ruth never lasted long. She turned her head just enough to look at me sideways. I know. I've suspected it since Friday, and tonight I knew for sure, and I need you to tell me right now, before this goes one more day, whether you're going to keep pretending you don't love my granddaughter, or whether you're finally going to do something about it. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Somewhere behind us, up at the house, someone laughed too loud. Glasses clinked. A party that had nothing to do with any of this kept going without us. Ruth just waited, the way she had apparently been waiting the whole weekend for me to catch up to what she already knew. 2 nights earlier, none of this had a name yet. Not the lie, and not the thing underneath it that had quietly stopped being a lie sometime around Friday night, without ever asking my permission. I'm Micah Ward. I'm 30. I've spent 6 years working as a paramedic in Nashville, and most nights I run toward the exact thing everyone else is running from, which either makes me brave or just means I never learned how to sit still with a problem I couldn't fix inside of 10 minutes. That Thursday I'd finished a double shift, my hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic, and I was eating cold noodles over my kitchen sink when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see that night. Jo Ainsley. She almost never called. 8 months of knowing each other, maybe 4 phone calls total, the rest all texts and an occasional Sunday coffee that had quietly turned into a habit neither of us bothered naming out loud. I picked up on the second ring. Before I even got a full hello out, she was already talking, fast, words tripping over each other. Micah, I need a favor, and I need you to say yes before you hear the whole thing, because if you hear the whole thing first, you're going to say no. I set the noodles down. That's not how favors work, Jo. It's how this one has to work. Fine. What's the favor? A pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, quieter. I need you to be my boyfriend this weekend. Not really, just for 2 days. My grandmother's actual birthday is Sunday, but the whole family's celebrating Saturday night at the lake house, and Priya was supposed to come with me, so I wouldn't be the only one standing there alone again. And she just texted me 20 minutes ago that her flight got canceled, and I have exactly 1 weekend to either show up by myself again or find somebody who can stand next to me and make my aunt stop asking if I'm dying alone. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was deciding, I'd already decided somewhere around the word alone, but because I was trying to figure out why my chest had gone tight over a favor that shouldn't have cost me anything at all. Why me? I asked, some small, hopeful, petty part of me already wanting the answer to be more than the obvious one. Because you're the only man I know who wouldn't make this weird afterward, and because my grandmother's knees have been bad, and there's been talk, quiet talk, about whether the house gets sold before winter instead of after, so this might be the last summer she wants to do this at all. And I would rather show up with someone who's kind to me than spend the whole weekend watching my mother's face fall every time somebody asks why I'm still single. There it was, the thing underneath the thing. Not embarrassment, grief, dressed up as a favor. I didn't need to think about it. Okay, I'll do it. She let out a breath I could hear clear across the city. "You have to actually commit," she warned. "My cousin Camille has been circling this family like a shark since I called off my engagement, and if she smells anything fake, she will make it her personal mission to expose us in front of 40 people and a birthday cake." "I'm serious," Camille cross-examines. I laughed, and it came out more nervous than I meant it to. "Send me the file." "What file?" "The one where I learn everything about you a real boyfriend would already know." A pause, softer than the rest of the call. "I already started making it 20 minutes ago, before you even said yes." I didn't tell her that detail sat somewhere warm in my chest for the rest of the night. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was wrong about that almost immediately, though it would take me until a dock in the dark 2 nights later to actually admit it. Friday morning I pulled up outside her shop, and she was already locking the front door with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a garment bag draped over the other, calling instructions back through the glass to whoever she'd left in charge. "Water the ranunculus, not the roses. The roses are fine." She dropped into the passenger seat, still finishing the sentence, and it was a full 3 minutes before she spoke a word to me, which felt about right for both of us. She handed me an actual folder before we'd even hit the highway, tabbed, color-coded. Section 1, How We Met. We're keeping it close to true, because Camille will ask you to describe the restaurant, and if you make one up, you'll get the napkins wrong. Say we met on an app, one dinner, decided we were better as friends, and then 8 months of feelings we didn't do anything about until now. That's not far off the actual truth. That's the whole point. She tapped the folder against my knee. The best lies barely have to lie. Section 2 was a list of facts. Her mother, Diane, who cried at every wedding including strangers. Her father, Paul, who would ask me exactly one question about my job and then talk about lawn fertilizer for the rest of the weekend. Her favorite color, which was pointedly not the shade of the bridesmaid dress she'd worn 11 months earlier, a detail she made me memorize with a specificity that told me exactly how much that particular wedding had cost her. Her coffee order, oat milk, 1 sugar, the fact that she read a book twice if she loved it enough, and underlined twice at the bottom, in handwriting that had clearly pressed hard into the paper, "Do not, under any circumstances, bring up Derek." Not his name, not his job, not the fact that he was technically still friends with half her family online. Derek's the ex-fiancé. She kept her eyes fixed on the road, like she could outdrive the word if she just went fast enough. We called it off 2 years ago, 4 months before the wedding, and every single person at that lake house still asks about it like it happened last week. I didn't ask why, not because I didn't want to know, but because I could hear in her voice, this wasn't the moment, and some things you learn to leave alone until someone hands them to you on their own. We didn't talk about Derek again for the rest of the drive, but something in her eased afterward, like she'd been carrying that sentence around for 2 years and setting it down in my passenger seat had cost her less than she'd expected. 2.5 hours later, the trees opened up and there was Larkspur Lake, flat and silver in the afternoon light, and a long gravel drive leading down to a house with a wraparound porch and a dozen cars parked at angles that suggested nobody in this family had ever agreed on a system. Joe's hand found mine before we'd even gotten out of the car. Muscle memory. We'd never actually held hands before that exact moment, which meant it wasn't memory at all, just something her body had decided to do on its own. We'll ease into it. Nobody needs the full performance in the driveway. That's when a woman stood up from a porch chair fast enough to make it clatter, dark hair pulled back, arms already crossed before we'd made it halfway up the walk. Well, her voice carried loud enough for the whole yard to hear. Look who finally brought someone. Camille hugged like being frisked. She held on to Joe a beat too long, pulled back, and studied me head to toe like she was pricing a used car. "So you're the mystery man. 8 months and not one photo. That's either very romantic or very suspicious, Micah." Joe's voice carried an edge of warning under the introduction. "Camille, my cousin. She'll ask you 11 questions in the first 10 minutes. Answer the ones you're sure of and smile through the rest." I decided I liked her within about 4 seconds of that sentence. Inside, the house smelled like lake water and browning butter, and past the kitchen a small crowd of aunts and uncles argued cheerfully about whether the boat needed a new battery. On the mantel behind them sat an old photograph in a silver frame, a much younger Ruth laughing next to a man with kind eyes and a crooked tie. And I would learn later, on a dock, exactly how much that photograph still mattered. In the middle of the living room, in a chair angled to see the whole room at once, sat a woman who did not get up when we came in, which told me more about her than anything anyone could have offered first. White hair pinned with what looked like an actual chopstick, reading glasses pushed up onto her head instead of on her face, and the kind of stillness that made you feel interviewed before she'd spoken a word. Ruth looked at me over glasses she wasn't wearing. "So, you're the paramedic." Joe mentioned it exactly once, 4 months ago, in a sentence I wasn't sure I was supposed to remember. I'm surprised she remembered it either. Ruth's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile yet, but was aiming in that direction. "Oh, I remember everything. That's the curse of getting old without losing your mind for it." Camille, perched on the arm of the couch, leaned in like she'd been waiting all day for an opening. "So how'd you two actually meet? Not the summary, the real story." I felt Joe's hand find mine again, quick and deliberate, a small squeeze I understood immediately as "don't improvise." "We met on an app, one dinner. We were sure there was nothing there, and then there was 8 months of nothing we didn't do anything about until she called me Thursday night." Camille's eyebrows went up. "Thursday night? That's fast for a whole weekend commitment. Some things you don't plan. You just finally stop talking yourself out of them." It wasn't even a lie, not really, and that unsettled me more than if it had been. Across the room, Ruth had gone quiet, watching the two of us with an expression I couldn't read yet, one I wouldn't understand until the next night. At the end of that same dock, Ruth stood up, slower than she probably wanted anyone to notice. "Dinner, before your uncle starts telling the boat story again." Dinner was loud in the specific way big families are loud, 6 conversations running at once, and somebody's kid narrating his own meal to no one in particular. I caught pieces of things, that Ruth's knees weren't cooperating with the stairs anymore, that there'd been quiet talk about whether the house should get sold before winter instead of after, that nobody had breathed a word of it to Ruth directly, and everybody was hoping somebody else would go first. Joe caught me catching it and gave me the smallest shake of her head under the table. "Not now." And I understood, somewhere between the potato salad and the second round of iced tea, that this whole elaborate architecture of a weekend wasn't really about Camille at all. It was about giving her grandmother one good, easy, unworried few days before whatever came next. That reframed the entire favor for me. It made it feel less like something I was doing for Joe, and more like something worth doing properly, for its own sake. After the dishes were done, and most of the family had drifted onto the porch with drinks, Joe tugged my sleeve toward the water. "Walk with me. People will think it's romantic. It'll buy us goodwill." The dock stretched further than it looked from the house, boards silvery and a little soft underfoot, and by the time we reached the end of it, the party noise had thinned into something you could talk under instead of over. For a while, neither of us spoke. The lake did its quiet performance. Small slaps of water against the pilings, a fish breaking the surface somewhere and vanishing again. I picked at a splinter on the dockboard. Can I ask you something about Derek? She was quiet long enough that I thought she'd say no. Then, we were together 4 years. Everyone loved him. My mother still asks about his mother at Christmas. And 4 months before the wedding, I woke up and realized I'd agreed to a version of my life I'd built to make other people stop worrying about me. Not because I actually wanted it, and once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it, so I called it off right then and let an entire family reorganize itself around the fact that I'd broken something everyone else thought was already fixed. That's not the same as being broken yourself. She looked at me like that was the first time anyone had drawn that particular line for her. Try telling Camille that. Her voice had gone softer, like some of the old armor had come off it. Your turn. Why does a man who runs toward car accidents for a living have exactly 0 photos of a girlfriend anywhere in 8 months of friendship? I picked at the edge of a board instead of answering right away. Her name was Aubrey. We were together a year and a half, and when it got hard, really hard, the kind of hard that means you're building something real instead of just enjoying each other, I ended it in one conversation. 15 minutes. I'd already made the decision before I told her I was making it, because that's what I do. I decide fast and I don't look back. And it works great in an ambulance, and it is apparently a terrible way to treat somebody you love. Joe didn't say anything for a second. Then, quietly, do you regret it? Every day I don't think about it, which is most days. So I guess the honest answer is I've gotten very good at not finding out. Somewhere behind us a door banged and somebody called Joe's name, one of the aunts. Something about cake for tomorrow. And the moment folded itself shut before either of us could do anything with the 2 feet of dock still between us. She stood up first. We should go back before Camille sends a search party. She held out a hand to pull me up, and for 1 second too long, neither of us let go. Saturday morning, before the rest of the house was fully vertical, Joe volunteered us for an ice run, which I quickly understood was code for get me out of this house for 45 minutes before I lose my mind. The town near Larkspur Lake was small enough that the general store doubled as the hardware store, and the only place selling birthday candles that weren't shaped like the number 8. While Joe argued with the register about whether they had enough ice for 40 people, I found a shelf of cheap paperbacks by the door and pulled one out at random, a beat-up mystery with a cracked spine. Because somewhere in that folder it mentioned she reads a book twice if she loves it enough, and I had a sudden, stupid urge to give her something worth reading twice. I paid for it separately and tucked it into my jacket without saying anything. Outside, loading ice into the trunk, a woman about Joe's age stopped on the sidewalk and did a visible double take. Joe Ainsley. Her tone had the particular relish of someone who's been waiting years to ask an invasive question in public. I heard about you and Derek. Everything okay? I watched Joe's shoulders go tight for exactly 1 second before she recovered. Joe reached back for my hand without looking, like she'd done it 100 times instead of twice. Better than okay. This is Micah. The woman's eyebrows went up, did the math, offered something polite and clearly disappointed there wasn't more gossip available, and moved on down the sidewalk. Joe let out a breath once she was gone. 2 years, and people still ask like it happened last week. You didn't flinch. I flinched internally. Externally, I've had a lot of practice. We got back in the car, and for a second before she started the engine, she just sat there, hands on the wheel, looking at the store window. She spoke without turning her head. Thank you. Not for today, for not asking me to explain Derek again just because someone else brought him up. I know you want to. I do, but you already told me the important part on the dock. The rest is yours to tell whenever you feel like it, if you ever do. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that has weight to it, and I thought, absurdly, that I would drive to this exact parking lot every day for the rest of my life if it meant getting looked at like that again. Then her phone buzzed, Camille, texting in all capital letters, asking where the ice was and whether we'd eloped on the way to buy it. Joe laughed, the tension breaking all at once, and put the car in reverse. We should probably get back before she starts planning our second wedding. The rest of Saturday moved fast, the way good days do when you're not paying close enough attention to hold on to them. There was a card game on the porch that Joe's uncle took far too seriously. A raft war in the shallow end that ended with 3 grown adults soaked to the skin. And somewhere in the middle of it, the performance stopped feeling like performance at all. I caught myself reaching for her hand before I remembered we were supposed to be selling something. She caught herself leaning into my shoulder during the card game, like it was just where she went now. Neither of us mentioned it. Around 2 o'clock, a determined 7-year-old named Wyatt, who had spent the morning declaring himself team captain of a sport nobody else was playing, went down hard off the dock ladder and came up screaming with a gash across his palm, bleeding enough to scare every adult on the property into useless motion. I was already moving before I'd finished registering the sound, kneeling in front of him with his hand wrapped in my shirt. Pressure, elevate, don't look at it, look at me. I talked him through it in the same flat, steady voice I use on strangers at 3 in the morning, because panic hates a calm voice more than it hates almost anything else. 4 minutes later, the bleeding had slowed to something manageable. Once it was fully controlled, I cleaned and dressed the wound, checked that he could move and feel every finger, and told his parents he still needed urgent care in town to make sure no tendon had been damaged. Wyatt had stopped crying by then and started narrating his own injury like a war story. And I looked up to find half the family standing in a loose, silent circle around us, Ruth at the front of it, watching me with an expression I still couldn't fully name. Camille, watching from the edge of the circle, shook her head. That's not first date material. But there wasn't any bite left in it. That's just what he does. Joe's voice had gone quiet, like she was correcting something small but important, and that sentence landed somewhere under my ribs harder than it should have for something so simple. Ruth didn't say a word. She just looked at me a beat longer than felt casual, then turned and went back up to the house, and I didn't think much of it until later, when I understood she'd already started building the conversation she was going to have with me that night. Camille found me alone at the boathouse that evening, while Joe was inside helping frost a cake that didn't need frosting. She leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed, in full cross-examination mode, exactly as advertised. Quick question. If this is real, you'll know it without thinking. How does she take her coffee? I didn't even have to reach for the folder in my head. Oat milk, 1 sugar. She'll pretend she doesn't want a second cup, and then drink half of mine. Camille's arms stayed crossed, but something in her face slipped for just a second, like a door that wouldn't quite latch. That's oddly specific for 8 months of nothing. People notice things about people they pay attention to. Doesn't mean what you think it means. Doesn't not mean it either. She walked off before I could decide if that had been a win or a loss. 20 minutes later, it was Joe's turn. She found me on the back steps and sat close enough that our shoulders touched. Camille cornered me in the kitchen. She wanted to know why a man I've never mentioned in 8 months of phone calls suddenly knows my coffee order better than my actual last boyfriend did. I told her I have no idea what she's talking about. She told me I looked terrified. Joe's tone stayed light, but her eyes didn't, which means either you're a worse liar than I gave you credit for, or something about this weekend actually got to you. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the lake, giving me an exit if I wanted one. And for one long second, I almost took it, almost turned it into a joke, because a joke was the fast decision, the 15-minute conversation, the thing I already knew how to do. I didn't take it. Something got to me. I'm still figuring out how much. She nodded slowly, like that was an acceptable answer, even though I could tell it wasn't the whole one she wanted. And we sat there without saying anything else until somebody yelled that the cake was ready, 3 hours early, because nobody in this family could wait for anything. The early birthday dinner itself was almost too easy, which should have told me something. Ruth sat at the head of the table in a paper crown. One of the little cousins had made her. 80 candles clearly not happening, but somebody had lit an ambitious cluster of 12, and toasts went around the table, getting progressively more embarrassing the more wine got poured. Joe's phone sat charging on the kitchen counter, forgotten, screen lighting every few minutes with notifications nobody was watching. Except Ruth walked past it on her way back from the bathroom sometime after the cake, the way you do when you're the kind of person who notices everything whether or not anyone invited her to. I only knew because I saw her stop, just for a second, long enough to read a text sitting open on the lock screen from a name I recognized, Priya, something about hoping the fake boyfriend plan was going smoothly, and that she owed Micah one for stepping in after her flight got canceled. Ruth's face didn't do anything dramatic. She didn't gasp, didn't drop a plate. She just turned the phone face down, quietly, like she was tidying up after someone, and walked back to her seat at the head of the table like nothing in the world had happened. I thought I was the only one who'd noticed. I sat through the rest of dessert with my heart going in a way it never does at actual emergencies, refilling glasses nobody had asked me to refill just to have something to do with my hands, waiting for the moment she'd stand up and announce it in front of everyone. It never came. She caught my eye once, near the end, over the candles, and held it a half-second longer than a woman blowing out a wish should. And I understood, with a kind of cold clarity, that the quiet part of this weekend was over. The porch had long since emptied into nothing but citronella candles burning low by the time we were sitting together at the end of that same dock. And it was only then that I realized, a beat too late to mention it, that she'd walked me down here with the same 3 words Joe had used the night before. I still didn't have an answer for the question she'd already asked me, the one about pretending. But Ruth wasn't waiting on it anymore. She'd had a hunch since Friday, she told me, and tonight's text had turned the hunch into certainty. She'd been keeping a private list all weekend, and she started reading it back right there on the dock. You held her hand like you were being graded on it. Real couples hold hands like it doesn't cost them anything. And then somewhere around that boy's cut hand today, you two forgot to keep performing and started just being 2 people who like each other. And it was honestly the most convincing thing I saw all weekend, because nobody fakes that particular kind of quiet. Before I could figure out what to do with any of that, she kept going. Tonight I saw the text on Joe's phone. Priya, fake boyfriend plan. I'm old, not blind. I opened my mouth to explain, to apologize, to do something with the 15 minutes of fast talking I'm usually good at. And she held up one hand, the same gesture she'd probably used to silence rooms for 6 decades. I'm not angry. I want to be very clear about that before you say something foolish. I'm 80 years old tomorrow. I buried Walter 11 years ago. And if there's one thing I learned in 45 years of marriage to that man, it's that love almost never looks like the movies. It looks like somebody remembering how you take your coffee. It looks like a man kneeling beside a screaming child because it's simply what he does, without looking around first to see if anyone's grading him for it. You knew her coffee order. That's not something men fake, Micah. Performances get the big things right and miss the small ones every single time. You have every small one down cold, which means one of 2 things. Either you're the single greatest liar to ever sit at my table, or you're exactly what you looked like out there today, and you're just too scared to say it out loud in case you're wrong. My throat had gone tight in a way 6 years on the job had never quite prepared me for. I don't know how to do the slow version, I admitted. I know how to decide something in 15 minutes and live with it. I don't know how to sit inside not knowing for 2 days and let it turn into something real instead of just deciding it is and hoping I'm right. Ruth patted my knee once, like that was the most sensible thing she'd heard all weekend. Then here's my last piece of advice as a woman turning 80 tomorrow, free of charge. Stop deciding. Just once, try noticing instead, and see where it takes you. Then, leaning in, her voice dropping to something quieter than anything she'd offered all weekend, she gave me the sentence that had been waiting at the start of all of this the whole time. Don't let this one go, Micah. Some of us don't get a second one. She stood up before I could answer, patted my shoulder once on her way past, and left me alone at the end of the dock with my heart going harder than it had all weekend, and absolutely no ambulance coming to help me with it. I found Jo exactly where I expected to, sitting on the porch steps with her knees pulled up, phone in her hand, staring at a text thread like it might rearrange itself into something less humiliating if she looked hard enough. She saw my face and set the phone down fast, the words already spilling out. She knows. My grandmother saw the text at dinner. I know she did. I saw her face change for half a second. And I've been sitting here for 40 minutes trying to figure out how to fix a lie in front of 40 people the night before her actual birthday. I sat down beside her. She's not going to say anything. She already talked to me. Jo went very still. What did she say? That she'd suspected it since Friday and knew for sure tonight. That she's not angry. That performances get the big things right and miss the small ones. And apparently I haven't missed a single small one all weekend. Jo turned to look at me fully then, the porch light throwing just enough gold across her face that I could see her trying to work out what I meant without making me say it first. What small ones? She asked quietly. Your coffee order. The fact that you read books twice when you love them, which is why there's a beat-up mystery novel in my jacket pocket right now that I bought without really thinking about why. The fact that you give orders about flowers like the world will end if the ranunculus gets overwatered. The fact that I've spent 8 months telling myself we tried the romantic thing once and it didn't take. When really what happened is we skipped the boring part where two people learn all the small stuff about each other and did it backward instead, and I've only just realized I know all of it anyway. Jo didn't say anything for a long moment. The lake kept doing its quiet thing behind us, and up at the house a light clicked off, then another. She chose her next words carefully, like she was setting each one down somewhere fragile. So this weekend, what was it for you? Real. Since sometime around the dock last night, if I'm honest, and definitely since that kid split his hand open, and you looked at me like I'd done something ordinary instead of the thing I actually did, which was fall a little further for you in front of your whole family. Her breath caught, just barely, the kind of sound you'd miss if you weren't already listening for it. And you? What was it for you? She was quiet long enough that I thought maybe I'd gotten it wrong, jumped ahead, ruined the exact kind of thing Ruth had just told me to stop rushing. Then she reached over and put her hand flat against my chest, right over the spot that had been doing something complicated all night. I asked you because I trusted you. I'm asking you to stay because I don't want to trust anyone else with this particular version of me ever again. That was the whole answer, and it was also somehow not quite a yes or a no. So I did the only thing that felt honest, which was stop deciding and start noticing instead. Exactly like I'd been told an hour earlier. I leaned in slow enough that she could have stopped me. She didn't. It wasn't the kind of kiss you perform for a family across a porch railing. Nobody was watching this one. It was just the two of us, and the lake, and nearly 80 years of somebody else's hard-won advice. And when we finally pulled back, Jo let out a laugh that sounded like it had been waiting all weekend to get out, and rested her forehead against mine. We're going to have to actually tell people something now. The truth's going to sound insane. Tell them the truth. Best lies barely have to lie. Turns out neither do the best true stories. Sunday morning, the whole family packed up in the particular chaos of people who love each other but cannot agree on how coolers work. And somewhere in the middle of it, I heard Ruth tell Joe's mother she wasn't ready to let the lake house go this year after all, that it could wait until she'd had at least one more summer of grandchildren tracking mud through the kitchen. Even Camille softened enough on her way out the door to tell me, grudgingly, that she still thought we were hiding something. Though this time the words came with a smile. Ruth caught my arm on the porch a few minutes later, steadier on her feet than she'd let anyone see all weekend. She looked between me and Joe, who was arguing with an uncle about whether the leftover cake could survive the drive home. "Well, I suppose I don't need to give you my advice twice." "No, ma'am." She patted my cheek once, the same hand that had pointed out coffee orders and small, unfakeable things the night before, and went off to find her paper crown before somebody threw it away. In the car, halfway down the gravel drive, Joe turned to look at me with the kind of grin she'd been rationing all weekend like it might run out. "So, what do we actually tell people when they ask how we started?" I thought about the folder, tabbed and specific, the last-minute favor that had turned into the realest weekend I'd had in years, and Ruth's voice on the dock telling me to stop deciding and start noticing. Tell them the truth. Her grandmother saw right through us before we did. Joe laughed, reached over, and laced her fingers through mine. No rehearsal in it this time. No muscle memory standing in for the real thing. Good. That's a much better story than the one in the folder anyway.